If you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com to give at least $5 or $3 a month, and it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode. Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast. The new concert band and jazz ensemble music releases from Excelsior Music Publishing are here now and available from wherever you get your band music, featuring works of all levels from an incredible composer roster. Listen, browse, and get inspired at excelsiormusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. Tuner Caddy is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast. The Tuner Caddy was created by Mark Casperson, a band director with over 38 years of experience. Like most of us, he was tired of dropped tuners, wasted time, and students fumbling with their gear. So he did what any passionate teacher would do. He invented a solution. Mark designed the original Tuner Caddy after testing 57 different versions. The classic model fits right onto most music stands, holds any tuner, and even has a pencil holder. Then he added the Student Pro, a slimmer, binder-friendly with magnets, so it sticks right to the wire stands. And now there's even the TCT-60M, a full tuner and metronome combo that's transposable and includes a 6-foot mic. Super practical and more affordable than most other options out there. The best part is that these tools don't just help kids stay organized, they actually improve how we teach intonation and tone. Tuner Caddy is being used by some of the top programs in the country, from Texas to Virginia, and it's even been on stage at the Midwest Clinic and Music for All Festival. You can find Tuner Caddy at tunercaddy.com, at local retailers, or through Music and Arts, Sweetwater, and Premier Music Teaching Aids. They even offer support for educators writing grants. Check them out at tunercaddy.com. Do you spend valuable time all year correcting students' hand position instead of focusing on the music? Thumb Gummy solves this. These simple, cost-effective teaching aids fit on trumpets and trombones to guide the right hand into proper position, reducing tension, improving form, and giving tactile feedback so students can focus on playing, not adjusting. It's easy to use, comfortable, and designed by teachers and players, not just for your beginners, but for older students as well. Join thousands of students and bands already seeing the difference. And keep an eye out for our new clarinet thumb rest coming soon. Visit thumbgummy.com to learn more. That's thumbgummy.com. Welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 278. I'm here with Tony O'Toole. Tony, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Beautiful. Long Beach, California. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for getting up early. How's the weather out there?
It's great. Beautiful. I live 2 blocks from the beach. So every morning I get the marine layer, nice cool fog, and then beautiful days. And, it's worth the money to live out here. So,
as a composer, like, where did you go to school and who are some of your sort of greatest mentors in what you do now?
yeah, school was an important part of my development. I went after a composer rather than just a school or a brand of a school. So a big part of my of education, I went and studied with Jack Stamp, whose music I learned about probably when I was about 15 or 16. We played a piece of his in high school, and then I grew up in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and Jack Stamp, that's his state where he taught at IUP, where I went. And so he would do district bands and all that kind of music festival conducting he did, and people knew him. And my band director said, "Yeah, he's a good guy to go study with." So that's who I went with. I had never heard of IUP before, and incidentally, I heard a CD of the marching band that one of my friends got as promotional material for recruitment, and I listened to that. I go, "Wow!" And so I was like, a couple of things brought me there, and then I heard about it from other people who were going to go there too. So I was like, it just felt like fate was just saying, "Here you go. Here's an opportunity to study with a real composer that works and writes a lot of music and a lot of high quality music." So that's what I followed. I followed what I like, and then that'll be a theme throughout all of this probably interview if you're with your questions of understanding how I became a composer, what shapes my style or voice. It's all about finding what I like and what I don't like, and then understanding it and incorporating it. And that's an important important part for finding your own voice and your own growth and development as a composer. And then I studied same kind of story with Mark Camphouse. I'd never heard of George Mason University, and that's where I went. But I went there for him. I wanted to find the composers that I admired and find what it was like to learn from them. And I learned very different things from both composers. So it was a valuable experience both times. So that's my education. And then outside of that, I don't think people say it enough, but a lot of composing and being a composer is being self-taught. You have to figure a lot of things out on your own before your 45-minute lesson once a week, or before you have something played. The composer is a very uh, introverted kind of job, a very a rich inner life you have to have an imagination and a well-trained ear and mind, all the prerequisite knowledge to write music, and to then all the skills after writing it of just making the parts and doing all the formatting and understanding software. These things are all supplemental to knowing how to compose, and I try to you know convey that to students when they're trying to pursue this as a career, especially. Um, and then uh, I I'm rambling,
No,
but
I have some follow-up questions for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Go ahead.
First, a Jack Stamp story. So I took my group to one of these festivals that was at Symphony Hall in Boston, and he was the clinician that we got afterwards. So, not what a great day! You get to play on Symphony Hall, and then you get Jack
Oh
Stamp as a
yeah,
clinician. And it was funny because my co-teacher now, Joey Hendricks, was a student teacher with us at the time, and he was conducting a ballad. I forget what ballad. It was like this classic lyric work. And Jack Stamp had this quote to him that I still remember to this day, and he was 100% correct. The kids laughed and had no idea that it meant anything, but he said you're probably not old enough to conduct this piece as effectively as you can yet. Give yourself 20 years. And what he meant by that is like this piece is pulling out emotion, and life experience is something that
yeah.
helps you with pulling out, going through trials and tribulations and all this. So I remember that discussion, for sure. What were some of the takeaway, like when you think back to your time with Mark and your time with Jack? Like you said, they taught you very different things. I'm curious to hear like what's something that you learned from each one of them that you think of right away, and what are some of your takeaways from your time with them?
They're just polar opposite people, and just their personality. If you want to go that emotional route, their psychological profile, their personality, their communication style are very different. Although they're good friends, they've known each other for a long time, because I
Mm-hmm.
think their careers started to blossom at the same time. In the late '80s and the '90s and 2000s. So they very well aware of each other, communicate with each other. They've performed each other's music. So I'll start with Mark Camphouse. He is a very organized man, a very concise and clear man, very methodical in everything he does. He, for him, I think what I learned most from him is just the craft of composition, and to do things slowly and correctly, and to know exactly what you want to do and execute it properly. His music is all handwritten, and then he has I think Sergeant Douglas Richard is his copyist, and he does all the computer stuff. Mark Camphouse would operate on pen and paper and a typewriter if he could. He's a very old school guy, um, which I love. I mean, because I write by pen and paper too. So I operate at my most efficiently. I'm not going to use fast or slow with writing, but I get what I want to get done, and I do it at a pace that's comfortable with me without having to call Finale Helpline to figure out how to make this shape when my hand can do it very quickly. And also, I don't like to spoil my ear with what the computer could tell me is possible or what it sounds like. They'll, especially with band, the computer will never understand the delicate balancing act of how to get a concert band to sound good, how to balance it. And Mark Camphouse has a great ear for that, with composition, and how he writes his music and what he writes, the content of the composition, and ultimately orchestration. I think is his finest point, which is what makes his music sound so distinctive. From the first note of his pieces, you can tell, oh, this is a Mark Camphouse piece,
Mm-hmm.
because he has a very distinctive kind of symphonic sound with his orchestration, and how he tells a story with each piece. Um, and I don't think there was any music that ever sounded like his before he came around. There's certainly people like Alfred Reed and whatnot that have a more grandiose kind of symphonic sound,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a great sense of orchestration. Um, but some of those guys, they use an older format of concert band, like with the alto clarinet and all the other things that were integral to the orchestration, and then how they used it, cornets and all these older things that bands were using, and then having cornets and trumpets, and you had this wider palette in some ways wider with the older format of band writing, and then the new band writing has become more efficient, more lean. There's no alto clarinet usually. There's no cornets. You have maybe two or three horns. You have to start changing how you orchestrate for the horns, and so like I was saying before this about the culture of band, and it evolves and changes. That's a big part of how you approach writing for the band. You're not writing for the band Alfred Reed wrote for 50 years ago. You're writing for the modern concert band.
Yep.
Um,
I wanted to
as
jump in too. You mentioned symphonic band. A lot of people don't really realize the difference between like the wind ensemble, quote unquote, and the
yeah,
symphonic band. The symphonic band, we're talking about numbers of people, right? You're talking 50 to
oh yeah,
100 plus,
quantities.
where, and there's just, it's not about a level of how good the group is, right? Like
Hmm.
maybe unless it's the Marine band, they can play anything they want. But, most groups, it just helps to have 18 clarinets versus your six.
Yeah, it's a whole different game with your Fred Fennell wind ensemble model with one on a part, maybe a couple extra players to fill in, like an extra tuba or something. But otherwise, that just one on a part changes everything. It turns it into a very large chamber orchestra. So
Yeah.
there's the conversation and the communication with the orchestra or the ensemble is very different, and how you go about phrasing things is hyperbolic. It cannot there's not 20 clarinets to smooth over everything in case one person breathes at the wrong place. It's like, you know that's like when you start having one violin player versus 20 of them. The bowing really matters at that point. The phrasing and how we do everything really has to be efficient and in agreement with each other. But yeah, your question was about the different styles of the band, so of the composers that I studied with. So I talked about Mark Camphouse pretty thoroughly, and then Jack Stamp, I think, is a different kind of composer. He has a different content to his composition. What drew me to him was his use of counterpoint, his consistent use of counterpoint, and not just having a little counter melody here once in a while, but using fugal writing as integrated into his compositional voice of developing melody. So you see, he he learned from Robert Washburn, who was his composition teacher many years back when he took a summer course. That wasn't even a summer course with Robert Washburn up in SUNY Potsdam, I believe, and he just wrote to Robert Washburn, who's a student of Nadia Boulanger, um, and just wrote to him and said, "I love your symphony for band." And he said, "I love how you use the timpani melodically." And he was a percussionist like I was, in high school, and so that's what drew him in. And then he started to unravel everything with the Washburn Symphony, all three movements of it. And then he went and studied where I studied at IUP. So he's a legacy there, studied and then taught and 25 years there as a teacher. But his music, highly contrapuntal, very colorful, expansive use of percussion at a time when that was still unbroken territory, like
Mm-hmm.
using like five or six different percussion instruments. A piece like Gevorkne Fanfare or some of his earlier pieces in the 80s using a full family of percussion instruments, all the keyboard instruments like Granger was using, Granger was using all the tuneful percussion, like the vibra harp and the things that whatever he called them in his anglicized English. But he was using all the keyboard instruments, and he was using the percussion instruments. Something like Children's March using castanets and tambourine and all the little toys and whatnot, and then the battery percussion and then the mallet percussion. And that's way ahead of it. So that's like being Charles Ives, like before atonality really comes into favor. It's
Sure.
Granger was using all that expanded percussion writing because he said, "Why not?"
Yeah, his music is so great. You're right about the percussion writing. Like he seems like one of the first people to kind of integrate a ton of percussion consistently in his pieces.
Hmm.
I think my favorite piece of his, I don't know if this is a favorite of anybody else listening or not, but like I've lived a lot of my life in the grade 2 to 4 range. Like we've done stuff that's a 5, but like that grade 3 level,
Yeah.
Cenotaph, that fanfare. I don't know how many people know that fanfare. It's a great.
Dun
It's
dun 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 dun
yeah.
dun. I
I
I know
mean,
all his
the
music pretty
the
well.
the counterpoint in that, there's so much to teach of like contemporary music style, and it's like
Hmm.
a middle grade 3. If your percussion section can hang, with the parts, it's very playable. And it's so super short, what, like a minute and a half or so. I urge people to check out that piece if they have not. Cenotaph, CENOTA.
TAPH.
Yeah, great piece.
Yeah, it's a fancy word for a monument to somebody who's dead, but like the Washington Monument or something. That he's not buried there. Fancy word, but just cool piece. And like you said, living down in the 2 to 4 range, you sort of get old. You get tired of the very formulaic stuff.
Yeah.
And it's okay to write a lot of the homophonic kind of music where everybody plays the same rhythm and whatnot. But even kids at grade 2 level will get tired of that same texture. It's like this porridge or slop that you get fed every day, and you go, okay, I'm getting tired of just playing, one flat seven, one flat six, that progression, and all the stuff, the tropes and cliches of that level, and then also just the handful of textures compositionally that you can use at that level. But he goes, I'm going to write contrapuntal music. I'm going to write an exposition of a theme, and then on the dominant reply back, and use that oscillating tonic dominant voice entry. But that's cool, and that's possible at a young age. If you're doing your job as a band director, and if you're only teaching them one style of how music can work with, accompaniment and melody, or everybody plays the same rhythms, block chords, and homophonic structures, you start to, get them to learn, even though they might stumble at first with the independence of lines, being like, okay, I'm not playing what the other person's playing. Because, band, especially with the symphonic band, you can get very cozy, doubling everything and everyone being very secure and saying, well, I'm playing what the person next to me is playing, or over there, they're playing the same thing. So I don't have to think too critically or be too responsible, you know.
Yeah.
So cenotaph and pieces like that help expose, independent lines and fugal writing to younger players, which otherwise didn't really exist that much.
This wasn't in our plan, but I'd actually like to throw a recording of this piece in. So there are some places
just
where
for reference.
where the bodies are buried, like the very last 4 bars or whatever. There's like this really tricky thing. I think the clarinets go up to high E. So I mean, it's a grade 3.5. It's not like it's a super simple piece, but
Yeah.
it definitely, I feel like it sounds harder than it is, and it's a piece that I've
Oh
gotten
yeah.
to get together pretty quickly compared to what it sounds like. So let's take a listen to it. Here's Cenotaph, Jack Stamp. Tony, what's some advice that you might have for other composers?
Uh, it depends how old they are, how far along they are, what they're really digging for, what answer they're looking for. But I mean, the answer I give to younger composers, and by classical music standards, I'm still a young composer. You're not a composer till you're dead. But so for me, I'm on my fledgling career here in my mid 30s now. But I see now the culture shifting and the kids that are getting into music, being into more different varied kinds of music or different means of production of music. But I think what I know is timeless, or at least what I've studied and tried to instill in myself is timeless. It doesn't it's not dependent on software or what the technology is or what the relevance of the ensemble we're writing for is anymore. But it's just understanding the craft of things and how things work, and being patient, and understanding inside of yourself if you really want to do this, if because it's very hard to put financial pressure on something you really love, because you can lead to burnout, you can lead to just despising the activity or the hobby that once brought you a
Mhm.
lot of joy. um, there's going to be days where it sucks, it's not going to be fun, even no matter what job you're in. If you're a professional, I think the mark of a professional is knowing that some days you're going to have to do it when you don't want to do it, especially for band directors. And it's something, you know, I don't know if it gets talked about enough, but being a band director is, especially at the high school level, is grading, and you have to, grading with a T, not D, but it's it's fatiguing. You're lucky you get a couple months kind of off in the summer, but even then your mind is still always thinking about it.
Yeah.
And that's how composition is for me. It's something that's always on my mind. And so I just make sure they get a good sense of what they're getting into if they're getting into composition, and it's very early, because composition degrees can often include more than one degree, and it's very common to say, well, if you're going to get a bachelor's, go get a master's and keep going and keep going, and that's the safe route. And for me, I wanted to get out there and actually write. I was in school for so long, and I'm a very motivated self learner, so I can go out and listen to things and take things apart and put it back together. I've been doing that since I was a kid. But I just try to impress upon them what it's going to entail, because it's a long life, and it's a lot of work, because the threshold for success as a composer is very small. It's like trying to be a baseball player. It's to get up to the MLB and to be at the top is reserved for a very few, and they're not there just because they had talent or just interest. Is they're there because they had perseverance and patience, and they had a sense of, okay, I'm not great yet, I can't do it yet, I need to do this, I need to do this first and this first. And there's a lot of, with composition especially, there's prerequisite knowledge and knowledge you have to build on before you can get to this and to this to this. And many times, especially when you're young, God love them, they want to jump right into the pool and they go, I want to write a concert band piece, I want to write an orchestra piece, I want to write the next planets, or write a spring. I go, that's not going to happen right away. And you have to write something small. A concert band is 36 different staves, and you have to learn how to write for each stave independently. You need to learn about a clarinet, you need to learn about a flute, a piccolo, the oboe, the bassoons. You have to go down the staff, and just each one of those is a course on its own. And you have to have contact with the musicians that play those instruments, and varied contact with young musicians and older musicians, and very good ones and very bad ones, and to understand how all the instruments work. And band is very hyperbolic in that sense, because band uses only wind instruments, and every wind instrument we have, everything from an E flat clarinet to a contrabass clarinet, and different things that the orchestra doesn't even use: saxophones, euphoniums, baritones, flugelhorns, things like that. So it's thorough, and it's gonna take a long time to get competent at. It's not like something you can be very good at right away, at least in the way you have, because it's a lot of music is all about what has inspired us. And the planets or the rite of spring, something big and gigantic and beautiful like that, can be really inspiring. And when we're young, psychologically, we just want to impress adults, we want to be proved of, we want to do something great. And we don't expect that from young people, especially as the older we get. We just want them to grow, we want them to learn, and maybe share what we know with them. So we don't expect them to be Igor Stravinsky or Percy Granger or something right away. It has to start somewhere, and it's very satisfying to watch once they are engaged in the process. But yeah, that they have to just to know what life is all about before they go jumping into it. And especially as older people, we can tell them this is what a career in composition looks like, or this is what a band director looks like, at age 21, at age 31, and 50, 60, and what you bring to it and how you go about doing it. And you're going to fail and fall down and falter a lot along the way, and you're going to have to rely on asking people for help. you know especially for band directors that have kids interested in composition, like most of us don't know how, especially band directors don't know how to really deal with that. And they can sort of start it with if they're teaching music theory at their school or whatnot, but eventually they're going to need to talk to a composer, and that's you can do that by contacting your local university, get them in touch with a composer there or a student composer there that's promising, and sort of get them talking about what they want to talk about. But
Yeah.
I think that's the most important advice for composers I can start out with when they're young. And then also just to take your time and do it right, not do it fast. Um,
Well,
and these are not,
I'll say you just gave like 10 pieces of advice. So that
yeah.
was like we got a lot of our money for
And that's
that.
the beauty of podcasts. You can just
Yeah.
stop this and listen to something. And my wind band score studies are like that too. You can watch them just passing by in real time, or you can slow down and
Yeah.
pause on each thing and read all the little tidbits and the information on the side. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a brilliant segue because that was sort of the meat of what I wanted to get to today. You know,
yeah,
the
sure.
whole art of score study. I mean, first of all, as somebody who like puts videos together and creates content and stuff, I can't imagine. So, question: that each one of those videos, some have close to 100,000 views, which is just staggering in the band world.
Yeah.
Um, how long does the video take you? On average, one of those videos takes you what 100 hours, more or
Oh,
less.
wow. It depends on which one and how long. And sometimes the answer shocks you, but
Yeah.
really, like, there's like four steps in the whole process. And the process started because I had a file on my computer with all of these score reductions I had done and the harmonic analysis. And then just stuff that wasn't even on the computer, just piles of it in file cabinets and notebooks. It starts you know, I find something I like in my ear and I go and search after the music. And, my mom was a teacher, so I grew up using libraries profusely.
Mm,
So I remember my mom would just drop us off at the library after school, and I just be in there for like 6, 7 hours in the Philadelphia Public Library, and they had sheet music in there. So you could go in there and look at sheet music and listen to audio recordings. So I would go find the score, and then I go listen to the music. And I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. Like I had no clue what the score was saying. It could have been
mm.
Mandarin Chinese, and I wouldn't have understood it. But you start to look at that, and then you understand that moment. And you go, I don't know anything at this point. And then it can help you feel good along the way. Once you start to learn something, you can say, well, if I think through the eyes of that 7-year-old looking at a score by Haydn or Mozart, I can go, well, I can read that now really easily. I can copy that compositionally. I can be a chameleon and slip into that mode pretty easily. But yeah, for making each one of those videos, whether I had the material already done, which I can't gauge how much time I spent on that because I
I
can't
mean,
remember.
that alone is a lot.
Yeah, taking the score, especially like take a one movement piece, that's like maybe like 7 minutes long, and then I'm just entering that into the computer or making my production sort of in my head before I ever put it into the computer. So my composition process, a lot of it is thinking before I ever waste any time writing. So I have to have the idea in my head. I have to know, okay, let me study the score and see which voices are working in tandem. And then you can say, okay, well, these guys are all playing these long pads of chords. These saxophones are doing this. And the trumpets or cornets or whatever the score has, they say, well, they're playing the melody and they have it in um, homophonic rhythm. Everybody's playing the same thing, but they're playing different notes, so it's harmonized. And then the horns are playing this line here, and then the tubas are playing this, but then also the bass clarinet and the bari sax and the bassoons are playing that also, and the string bass. And so you go, okay, you start to see how the teams are lined up, and you start to do that in your head. And then every time you do that, you're realizing the patterns of how people typically orchestrate, whether it's orchestra or band or whatever. So you start to see all of the tropes and the formulas, and they're there for a reason. They're not bad to notice formulas and tropes and whatnot. These things work, and music is built on what has worked and what has sounded
Hmm.
cool. The theory, the orchestration, the counterpoint. We've all these rules because that's what's worked. That's what sounded good. So getting back to preparing the score analysis, all of that work, which I can't even quantify into how long that takes. Some pieces like Chester Overture or something old like that I've known since high school. I've been understanding it since I was a teenager. So you can't really gauge the time on that. But if you think about the physical work of me reducing that, which I did in high school because I love the polytonality and the poly chords, I wrote that down, and especially with band, like it could be a very clean chord, and but then it's transposed 100 times into six different transpositions, and then
Hmm.
you're looking at it. Is it bitonal or is it just transposed? And then you start to look at it and you go, okay, everything's in major thirds. And then you start to go, okay, and then the blur of a score gets a little bit clearer. It's like less muddy and more information, and just sort of turns into something useful. So
You mentioned polychords because that's like that's an example for me of how score study really helps me become an effective teacher on the podium with my students. Going
mhm.
back to cenotaph, it's like if you can look at this chord and you go, this just sounds like I don't know what it is. It's not a major chord, it's something else, right? But if you
Yeah,
break it apart, you're like, it's just B major and D flat major on top of each other, right? But the cool part as a teacher is when you're on the podium, you can, if you like know who has what, you explain to the kids this is like two chords at the same time, and their eyes just like light up like you just invented something really cool. And then you
yeah.
play the separate groups chords together, and then you put it together, and they understand that, and then they're like more confident as humans because when something's a little uncomfortable, but they know they're right, they
Yeah.
play it out. Like that's an example of how the score study, and it just made me think of it with polychords, that that the score study can help you in that effective teaching mode.
Yeah, because it's one thing to be sitting there and just running the piece down and getting to something, and you both go, "What the hell's that?"
Yeah.
Yeah, because those students have to believe in you that you know better than them, and that's just the dynamic of conductor and musicians, especially in a large group. You have to herd the sheep. You have to impress upon them that you know what they're doing, and then if they're not doing it correctly, you'll help them do it. Um, that's a big part of the dynamic of composition of conductor and musician. And if you don't know what you're going into with any battle plan or any reason or rhyme into what you're doing on the podium, they're going to lose faith in you, and they're going to go,
Mm-hmm.
well, why should I listen to him? And then the eyes will always be buried. They won't look at you until it's too late. And fostering this kind of dynamic is very important from the first moment. Whether from the moment you stand on that podium, it should be business, and it should be you know taking advantage of the position of authority you're given, whether that's the school gave you that as the teacher, or you're a community band director and you're sort of elected from the masses to conduct. The position is still the same. It should be transformative. Once you step on that podium, you should know what you're doing. You should know how to help them navigate it, and you should have a plan.
It also helps with the wellness of the band director. And I've said this on past
Oh yeah,
podcasts. If you, if you're studying Copeland, like, and you find some stuff that's really cool, well, I can tell you from experience, I've been teaching, I just finished year 22. The days run together. You're talking about having days that are harder than others, and you have to
yeah,
kind of slog through it. And like, yes, it's 12:48. I have this band again, and those clarinets still can't do this. And I mean, it gets very monotonous, as teachers know. But to have just studied Copeland and be excited about this bit of new information, not only are you sharing it and the kids will follow you because you're bringing a benefit to their life, as Dr. Tim says, but also you're having more fun. You're like, this is great. This is a
yeah.
really cool thing I found, and I want to share it with you guys. And it helps you be more energetic and motivated as a teacher on the podium as well.
Exactly. And if you have a lot of bad days stringing together, you have bad weeks and bad months, and then you just quit. You just stop caring
Yeah.
about it. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't quit when they stop caring about it. They sort of inflict that punishment of, if I'm burnt out, I'm gonna, sink the ship with me. But you have to really, like I was saying with the composition, I think back to my experience in band and how much I love that and how important that was for me. And I say, well, as an adult now, I should perpetuate that experience for younger generations, and I should give them a better experience. New repertoire, new ways of thinking, new ways of rehearsing. If it was band 50 years ago, we did go down the line and say, who played the wrong note? Play, 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 and then
Mm.
we would demoralize them, and we would tell them, oh, and then that would make you afraid. You might practice, but it might be out of fear. If we're all learning together and if we're all navigating the same thing together, and we have someone that knows a little bit more that's guiding us through it. It makes us feel very confident, especially when you're a young person. You're so self-conscious. You don't want to sit out there and play a D natural when the other chord is playing a D flat, you're going, no, 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 that's wrong, that's wrong. And
Yeah.
these kids are just navigating the overtone series. They're it's not even something they can see or understand. It's just, their body tells them a biological response that says, I'm not in line with whatever else is happening. And that's a hard skill for children to really do because they're so obsessed with what everybody's wearing, what shoes they're doing, how they're talking, what they do, where they go. Um, and we all go through that phase as kids. We're not born confident. We have to be taught that. We're not
Yeah.
born strong. We have to be taught how to be strong. And that's an emotional strength and physical strength, and all of those things are very important. That's why band's so important. It teaches us about emotion. It teaches us how to use that in a sort of sublimated positive way of using emotion for something that's collectively good. And
I love
so
I love that. So when I'm looking for a little bit of practical advice for band directors who maybe don't are not as comfortable in pulling apart information from a score, things that are hands-on that they can do next time they go to do it. And I'll just throw one in. I was taught at one point, okay, if you're talking block chords and we're not talking about counterpoint and all this, still looking at the harmony of a piece.
yeah,
I was taught one of the first things I was taught was look at the low brass parts. You don't have to deal with the transposition of the instruments. Typically in some of these easier pieces, if you look at tuba and the trombone parts, baritone, you can see in one clef without transposing, you can
yeah.
see that that's A minor. So harmony wise, obviously, a piece has to have them playing at the time, but that's a way to kind of to look at things from a harmonic standpoint. What are some like very other practical things that you would tell band directors that maybe don't have a lot of experience in pulling apart a piece and figuring out how to score study on their own?
Yeah, that's good advice if you're in America and not Europe. And, because low brass in Europe could be in treble clef and B flat transposition. So it can be great advice if you're in America. You're looking at American music where it's just all bass clefs, and you could look at the chords because that's good advice because you think about the nature of the bigger instruments and they can't play as agile phrases. So they're going to be supporting with a lot of what Ravel called sonorous fluid or just big block chords that things can be built on top of.
Mm-hmm.
The big instruments, that's their role in the ensemble is to support everything and to be, the harmonic glue and fluid of things. So you can see, okay, no matter how cryptic the composer's being, down here he has to write a B flat chord going to, this chord to that chord. You start to see the playbook harmonically,
Yeah.
while maybe other elements of music are going around it. But um, with studying the music, to keep harping on the question of how the videos were made in the score study, because I think that'll be pervasive through all my answers, is just because I'm also offering the score studies doesn't mean that that's the end of your score study. Um, that's always the double-edged sword for me of why I decide, do I do this or do I not do this? If I do this, will this be a crutch for them, and they'll say, "Well, I'll only program the pieces that O'Toole does score studies for," and I've seen that happen. And then, but ultimately, in my mind, I want people to be curious and then to go off that information that I present in my videos, and then also just for that to be the impetus for starting their own. It makes something that's difficult a little less difficult seeming and a little more approachable. But there's good advice. I think if you have ever studied score study before with anybody else or in college, I don't know how, I wasn't an education major, so I don't know how extensively they go into score study and whatnot, instrumental
I think
conducting.
it varies on your teachers and university that you're
Yeah.
at. So
But yeah, understanding the form of the piece, I think, is the probably the first thing you should do. So understand the geography of the music and say, well, and you don't have to know everything as it's going along. You just Jack Stamp will say this. You read it like you're reading a magazine in a dentist waiting office. You don't actually read the magazine. You just flip through. You go, oh, there's an article on this. There's an article on this. Your brain isn't understanding the information, but it's understanding the topography or the
mm,
geography. So okay, this page has more ink on it. This has more notes on it. And then you go, this one doesn't have as much, and you start to see the geography of how the music's laid out. And then you start to get a sense of how the layout of the piece works and how each section contrasts. Because then you can say, well, if there's a lot of notes here, then not a lot of notes here. There's a transition here. There's an episodic moment here that I can make a little marker on the top and go, this, that's why there's a rehearsal mark here. That's why, they give us a number here because this is a formally important part of the musical structure. So then you can go through it that way, just glossing through and understanding the geography of the music. And then you can start to take apart those little moments. You go, okay, are these little moments the same as somewhere down the line? Is it a copy and paste? Like this little heavy
Hmm.
note section is repeated over here. And then you go, okay, it's repeated 3 or 4 times. Is this a rondo? Is this like a repeated ritornello section of a rondo like piece that has outer parts that are contrasted with inner parts? Is it ABA or what is the style or what is the form? And then that can help you start to go, okay, the piece is not as long as I think it is. It's not as complex as I think it is. And you start to, you know, take it apart and not think it's so as intimidating because you're not looking at it like a listener listens to it as it comes. You're looking at it as if an actor's looking at a script. This is the part that I need to accent or highlight because it's the climax of the third act, or the and we start to notice that when we read and we understand literature, especially with drama, you go, okay, there's always an ascending moment in the first act after we've understood everything. Like that's exposition in a piece. And then you get in to say, okay, well, now we want to develop those dynamics and characters we've met in the first act and the second act, and we want a falling act or something bad to happen at the end of the second act. It's like in Empire Strikes Back. And then we want Return of the Jedi. We want that triumphant ascent to a higher place than where we started when we introduced everybody. So that's
Interesting. Yeah.
that's the Heldenreise, the German term for hero's journey that writers usually use. With a problem and an answer and an ascension into a higher state of existing from the beginning. But that's how you study the score. You go, well, does it end quiet or does it end soft or does it end slower than it started? Is there a tempo primo or come sopra at the beginning? These are all little things you can understand about before you ever understand one note or one chord. You just start to look at the big picture because look at a way a child could look at it. Look at a
Hmm.
way a 7-year-old version of me in the Philadelphia Public Library could understand it. You go, there's a lot of notes on this page. There's no notes on this page. There's one oboe solo here with sparse harp accompaniment. Like there's a need for contrast in composition. Too much of the same thing, and it could be fun or it could be a novelty, but you need that journey in music, and that comes not only from just the composer, but the band director interpreting that battle plan like an officer from a general gets that plan and that initiative and then implements it. And every conductor, every military officer will implement that differently because they have different ways they know work and of achieving that goal. So it's more
Yeah.
about vision, which comes from the composer, and then the conductor implements that vision and articulates and interprets that. And musicians, they're the infantry. They carry the
Hmm.
voice and the vision. So it's a hierarchy like that. But everybody plays their role, and nobody's more important than the other one. In my eyes, I write music for musicians because I was a musician. I still am a musician, always will be. I want musicians to have the best quality music in front of them. I want them to have music that is worth their efforts and their talents. So I have a great respect for musicians, and just because I get to write the music doesn't mean that that's some self-ordained or
Hmm.
important position. I earned that by writing good music and getting myself out of the trenches as a musician. Um, and then I take that very seriously as an honor to be able to give people music to play. So I
Some
feel a great obligation.
some advice that I give people as well is like when you have some prep period time, I've never sat at the piano and a score and not learned something. I've
Oh
never,
yeah,
no matter how many times I've done a piece, if I sit and I start playing on the piano, I start writing on the score and I find things. Like for me, a very practical thing is okay, I don't even care what chord it is. This is a chord. Maybe it's just a major chord. Okay. But then I find out only 4 people in my band have the third of the chord. Everybody else has the root and the fifth. Okay, so now we're
hmm
talking. If I know that, then I tell that to the students. Say, oh, so this is why you 4 need to play louder. You need to play softer. Even apart from the you play it flatter, you play it sharper, you play it,
yeah,
all that. And then sometimes you go, wait a minute, that's a major chord, but there's also a second in the third clarinets that's like hidden. Well, that's also the
yeah,
low register of the clarinet, so that's going to be soft. So we have to, you know what I mean? Like finding these hidden parts. For me, it's harmony that I really enjoy
yeah.
getting to into a lot. I find I can bring that out in the students and their performance of it just by sitting down at the piano. And I don't do so under pressure. It's not like man, I got to learn this piece today, so we'll do it. I'll just do it
Hmm.
a little bit every week for 6 weeks and see what I can pull out. Doing Down a Country Lane with a piano was like revolutionary, the Copeland piece, because like there's all this stuff happening. You're like, oh, that's really
Yeah.
cool. And the hands-on part of the piano, I'm a very, very average piano player, but the hands-on part of the piano brings that out for me.
Yeah, I compose at a table and I have a piano if I need it, but I've got to feel the notes. I've got to feel the overtones and how everything lines up because a lot of my music I think has a lot of very unique voicings and everything, things that they're not going to be block chords in root position or with the typical voicings. I approach each new piece like it's like explore like finding a new little island in the ocean. Like a lot of the times I'm not successful. I'm out there just at sea in a raft, but then occasionally you come across this little island and you go, what can I do with this? But then you can't be comfortable on that island forever because it doesn't have everything you need. So then I go and keep exploring because that one little island of good, juicy music is not going to sustain me. I'm not going to make a career out of writing the same piece over and over again. Um,
Yep.
there's still a voice that's consistent with my music that a way of going about things and uh, the organization of things and my approach and my style it can be the same throughout the pieces, but I want to work with different material, different you know visions or whatnot, pieces that are sound like Christmas or pieces that sound like sadness or joy or whatever it is. It's you can't use the same methods and get a different result. It's kind of like a paraphrase of the Einstein quote: "Is insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results." Like even though I make my living as a composer, I can afford to explore because the way I live is very meager and simple. I'm not a decadent person. I don't drink or smoke or go out and do any fun things other than go to the beach occasionally. But other than that, music is my fun. It's my vice. It's my hobby. It's my passion, my job. And I bring all of that to that.
Mm.
And exploring is still something I feel like I have to do, or I'll feel like I'll stagnate and I won't be able to have a career because I'm not changing. I'm not bringing something new to say. Um, and a lot of what I was talking about before with like Jack Stamp having counterpoint in his piece, I'd like to do that too. I like to have something in my piece that makes you pick it over something else in a catalog especially when it's published amongst the other compositions. Um, it sticks out. It's not a piece that is like the other pieces that you get in your catalog that you get from Chose or Alfred or Hal Leonard. They're trying to sell you the same stuff, and a lot of that stuff works. But it's just like there's a few pieces you
Mm.
stumble on as a band director. You go, I'm going to do this because it's going to take a little work. It's going to take a little more knowledge I don't have, but it takes a curious band director and it takes a band director that knows their
Mm.
craft really well to pick a piece that not everybody else is playing.
Mhm.
Because we're not those kids anymore that are afraid to not wear the shoes that other people are wearing. You go, well, if I'm going to go to a festival this year, I want to bring something that the other band directors haven't heard. I want to bring something that showcases my band in a way that makes us work harder than your typical grade 2 or 3.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.